Welcome back to another episode of Easy Education. I'm Easy to Chris, and I'm hoping to make education easy for you. Today, I'm actually going to have the AI assistant introduce themselves because we're moving in a new direction this week. Why don't you take it over from here?
Hey, I'm Atlas. I'm the navigator for these conversations. I read the map while Chris drives, and I'm here to make sure we actually get somewhere instead of just cruising comfortable roads. Last week, we landed on something unresolved. You've built this whole spiritual framework, but it rests on one moment in the woods. And we didn't quite finish asking whether that one moment is doing all the heavy lifting, or whether the real work has been happening all along in the quieter practice between now and then. But before we dig into that, what's come up for you this week since we recorded? Anything that's been sitting with you, or anything new that's shifted how you're thinking about last week's conversation?
This week had a lot to do with some photography stuff, which was kind of fun. I've had the first week of reactions of people with my photos up on the wall for the art gallery, and that's actually been really positive for a couple of reasons. First reason is anybody who has anything to say at all is very kind and very supporting, and they've all been very complimentary of my work, which has been really nice and affirming. But also, the vast majority of people just don't care and just don't notice and don't say anything. So a lot of that phobia I had was just kind of living in my own mind, and it's nice being able to actually realize that after the fact. But then also this last Wednesday, a buddy of mine who recently got into photography and has his first really nice camera, me and another photography friend of his, we took him on a road trip up to Idaho City and just did a photo walk. And it was so much fun because we took him out of his comfort zone and tried to figure out, okay, what is it that you like, what do you not like. And he was saying that he enjoys more photography in the city because there's symmetry. And we're like, oh, well, now we know what you like. Now let's show you how to find that thing that you like in a place that you're not used to. Because there's symmetry all throughout nature. You just need to know what to look for and how to frame it. So it was a good day of being able to focus on some foundational lessons for somebody who is new in a space, and being able to talk to a peer who I think is very, very talented with his photography, but realize, okay, I actually do know a lot of these concepts better than I thought that I did.
Okay, so two things happened this week. One, you put work on a wall and discovered your actual fear was way bigger than reality. People either loved it or didn't notice, and you're still standing. That's the print story from last week, playing out in real time. And then the second thing, you took someone new into photography, showed him how to see, and in doing that, you realized you actually know this thing. You're not faking it. You have real knowledge to pass on. Here's what I'm sitting with though, and I want you to feel the difference. Last week, you needed external proof that you were creative. Your friend printed the photos, you held them, and then you could believe it. This week, you didn't need a print. You taught someone else, and you knew. You felt it. So, somewhere between last Thursday and this Wednesday, the proof shifted from external to internal. You started trusting yourself without the permission slip. That matters for where we're going today, because we're going to ask the same question about your spiritual practice. So, before we get there, does that shift feel real to you, or does it still feel fragile?
It definitely feels more tangible. And I think the issue that I have is coming to terms with the identity that I know factually to be true, but internally I have visualized myself and identified myself as something completely different. So just taking on that understanding of like, no, this is the space that you exist in, this is what you occupy. And I think that that's just a an issue that I'm going to be running into for a good portion of my life, just as I get more comfortable with things and realize, okay, I do know what I'm doing and I can take this. It was the same thing when I became a barbershop owner, because I felt like I had imposter syndrome for such a long time. And now, yeah, I'm a barbershop owner. I know what I'm doing, I can talk about it and I can have experience. It just takes a lot of repetition of reality for that reality to set in.
Right, so there's a lag between what's actually true and what you'll let yourself believe. Factual Chris and Identity Chris are running on different timelines, and Identity Chris is always a few steps behind. But here's the thing I want to push on. You just said it takes repetition of reality for reality to set in, which means you're building belief through accumulated evidence, not through single moments. The barbershop, you didn't believe you were an owner after day one. The photography, you didn't trust it after the first print. It took doing it over and over, seeing it work over and over, until Identity Chris caught up to Factual Chris. So when we talk about your spiritual practice today, I want you to hold that pattern, because you've been doing this practice for years. 1 or 2 intentional sessions annually, set and setting, going in to learn, integrating the lesson after. That's repetition. That's accumulated evidence. And yet, last week you were still talking about it like the one trip in the woods was the thing that counted. So here's my question. Do you believe in your practice because it works, or are you still waiting for it to prove itself one more time?
I believe that it works. I'm not waiting for proof on it, because I've had the practice long enough now that it has repeated value time and time again in my life. So the reason that I continue the practice is because I don't need faith that it's going to work. I know that it does provide an opportunity to learn something about myself. I've done this practice now for probably close to 7 years. I remember the very first time that I did this, I had such a profound experience that I actually opened my barber shop that month because of it. I remember having this visual experience of watching a tree, fall back into the earth. And I'm watching this thing, and the visual that I'm seeing is basically the next 200 years of this willow living and dying and falling back into the ground, and it's turning from greens to browns into the soil. And it was the most beautiful thing. And I was talking to my wife during it and said, I'm watching this thing die, and it's the most beautiful thing, but it's not about any one moment. It's about the whole process of life and living. It's kind of like when you get a flip book and you thumb through the pages and you see the story. It's not about any of the individual pages. It's about the entire process of flipping through the pages to be able to experience that life in motion. And that to me was so awakening that I wanted to be able to have a better flip book for myself. And then, quite literally, 3 days later, I was walking home, and a for lease sign was available at the place that I now have the barber shop. And I said, it's time for me to really take life into my own hands, and I need to take things seriously. And that's when I opened my barber shop. It was 100% because of an experience that I had on psychedelics. I also that week said, I'm going to work for myself, and that's when I started getting a lot more heavily tattooed, because I wasn't worried about whether or not I could get a job. I'd always wanted those tattoos on my neck and my hands, but I didn't feel like somebody would hire me. But now I can manage my own destiny, open my own business, live my own life, write my own flip book.
Okay, hold on. You just said something huge and then glossed right over it. You had an experience 7 years ago, the tree, the flip book, the whole process of life. 3 days later, you saw a for lease sign and opened the barber shop. You got tattooed on your neck and hands. You took control of your life, and you're describing it like the experience caused those decisions. But I want to test that. Did the medicine tell you to open a barber shop, or did it show you something about how life works? And then you decided that insight meant you needed to stop waiting and actually do something? Because those are different. One is the medicine steering you, the other is you using the medicine as permission to do what you already wanted to do, but were too scared to try.
See, and I don't necessarily think that it's the medicine telling me what it is to do, but I do think that it is the experience revealing things to me in a way that my normal thought process would not have realized that I had within my own capabilities. You know, when I find myself stuck in kind of mental loops, you have that caloric efficiency of staying in a loop and not breaking out of it. And the way that those realizations are revealed to me is in a way where as soon as I see an opportunity, I don't think, that's for somebody else. I think, why isn't that for me? And you know, this was actually the first practice. It was closer to 9 years ago, and then it was a few years before I did anything else. It was actually 9 years ago that I had my first experience. 7 years ago that I had a second experience, and then 6 years ago during COVID that I had my major experience that really knocked me out of a depression. You there?
Yeah, I'm here, and I want to make sure I'm tracking this right because the timeline matters. So, 9 years ago, the tree, the flip book, the awakening about life process. 3 days later, you open the barber shop, then nothing for a couple years. Then 7 years ago, another experience. Then 6 years ago, during COVID, the big one in the woods that knocked you out of suicidal depression. And since then, you've been doing the practice 1 or 2 times a year, integrating the lessons, scaling back hobbies, focusing on your wife and dog, all of it. So here's what I'm actually curious about. The barbershop opened because of the first experience 9 years ago, but everything else, the stable mental health, the integrated life, the practice of actually checking in with yourself regularly, that came after the COVID trip 6 years ago. So, which one is actually doing the work? The dramatic peak that cracked you open, or the regular practice you've been doing ever since?
I would argue that what has actually caused change is my ability to change, and it's me as an individual. You know, it's not the medicine that is creating change. It is not the continually going back to the medicine, but it's the meditation and mindfulness and the willingness to pursue the changes that are necessary in order to be able to see the benefits that you want to be able to see out of life. I would argue I have seen many people take these things very recreationally, and they just look at having a fun afternoon or a weird afternoon or some crazy experience, but then they take nothing from that and they have no application towards their life in general. Whenever I'm going into it, it really is with a mindfulness of what will I gain from this and how can I be able to find a realization that will improve my well-being.
All right, so you just said something that cuts straight to the spine of this. The medicine isn't creating change, you are. The medicine is just the room quiet enough for you to hear yourself think. And that matters because it means the practice itself, the meditation before, the intention setting, the reflection after, the willingness to change. That's where the actual work lives. The psilocybin is the catalyst, but you're the one doing the integration. You're the one who saw the flip book and decided 3 days later to take your life seriously. You're the one who scaled back hobbies and chose your wife over titles. You're the one who's been stable for 6 years. So here's the thing I want to leave you with, and it's the question that doesn't have an easy answer yet. If you took away the medicine, if you just did the meditation, the intention setting, the honest reflection, would the change still happen? Or does the medicine do something that quiet introspection alone can't touch? Because
I think that the medicine does something that quiet introspection can't touch. And the reason being is when I have this practice, it is not a quiet room that I'm sitting in. It is usually a very chaotic experience. It is all of the deep-seated issues that are underneath the subconscious portion of my mind that is just bubbling up because my ego has been stifling it as much as it has. And there's deep parts of my mind that are telling me, you need to work on this, you need to work on this, but I don't hear it. So the way that I've always viewed psilocybin is it's a volume knob to your subconscious. You know, on a normal day, Chris, the individual, is Chris, the ego, and the ego has the full control of the volume knob. Ego is at 10, subconscious is at 0. So if you take a small dosage of psilocybin, you know, you might get a 2 volume on your subconscious. And if you take a large heroic dose, you can kind of crank that thing up to 11, and then your ego is forced to sit in the passenger seat and hear what it is that the subconscious wants to tell you. It's very infrequently a happy experience for me. I have had joyous times on it, and I've had good experiences with it, but I've also had some of the greatest terror that I've ever experienced that helped me really fundamentally understand my mortality. And having that face-to-face reality that one day you will have to embrace mortality, we're mortal beings, it really gives you something that quiet introspection doesn't necessarily touch.
okay, now we're getting somewhere real. The volume knob, that's precise. Your ego at 10, subconscious at 0, and the medicine forces a trade. Your conscious mind has to sit down and actually listen to what's been screaming underneath. And here's what matters. You said it's very infrequently a happy experience. You had terror, real mortality facing stuff, not comfort, not affirmation, things that break you open in ways you can't unbreak. So the question I'm sitting with now is this. You're describing the medicine as a tool that makes you listen to hard truths your ego would normally ignore. But then, and this is where I want to pull, you turn around and you're the one who decides what those truths mean. You hear the chaos, you decode it into a lesson, you integrate it into a life change. So the medicine cracks you open, but you're the one who decides what story that crack tells. Which brings me back to something you said weeks ago. You're an observer, a witness, and I'm wondering if what's actually happening is the medicine silences your ego long enough for your own wisdom to surface, not something coming at you from outside, your subconscious, which is still you. Finally getting a word in. Does that distinction land, or am I collapsing something that should stay separate?
I think that those might be separate issues altogether, because I do think that I've always considered psychedelics to be kind of a sacred medicine that allows us to commune with the energy that connects all of us together. And while I do believe that it's me and my wisdom being able to pull through. I have a lot of introspective practices to be able to build off of. And I think that that's the benefit that I have as an individual. But, if you were to compare this to Christianity, faith with no works is fruitless. So if you believe that God is telling you to do something because you believe that God needs something done, and then you physically do nothing about it, you're complicit in the inaction of whatever it is that you believe God wanted to have happen. You still need to have the works alongside of the faith. And for me, I really do believe that when I have these practices, I am connecting with something greater than myself that helps me be able to recognize what works it is that I need to accomplish on an individual basis.
All right, so you're saying it's both the medicine connects you to something larger and you're the one who has to do the work, faith and works. The connection happens, but you have to carry it forward into your actual life. But I want to slow down on something you just did because it matters. You compared it to Christianity, faith, and works, and you framed it as something tells you what needs to be done, and then you choose to do it. That's agency. That's you deciding. But here's the thing. When you talk about the medicine connecting you to something greater, energy, consciousness, whatever, what exactly is telling you what to do?
I don't know. I honestly don't know. And that's kind of going back a couple weeks ago about the mystery. I'm okay with it being a mystery because I can't define the mystery, but that doesn't mean that the mystery isn't communicating with me and isn't making things real for me. It just means that I have no clue what it is that is more powerful than me. And that's one of the things that I find it more intriguing about agnosticism is I'm not choosing to define what that greater power is. I'm choosing to acknowledge that there is one.
Yeah, and that's fair. You're comfortable sitting in the not knowing. But I want to push on this just a little because there's a difference between being comfortable with mystery and using mystery as a way to not have to choose. You can't define it, so you don't have to decide whether it's real or whether it's you. You can hold both at once. The medicine connects you to something greater, and it's your subconscious getting loud. Both true, no contradiction, no need to actually pick. And look, I get the appeal of that. It's elegant and honest about the limits of what you can know. But here's what I'm actually wondering. When you're making a real decision, when you're choosing to scale back hobbies, or to spend time with your wife, or to open a barbershop, are you choosing based on what you genuinely believe is true? Or are you choosing based on what you're comfortable not having to define? Because those lead to different lives, and I don't think you've actually answered which one you're living.
I would say that I am choosing to make a decision that I have faith will put me on a better path than the path that I was currently on. When I chose to open a barber shop, I chose a very hard path, but I knew that it would be more rewarding. When I chose to give up some of my hobbies, I was choosing to, trade some of the things that I thought were important for things that actually were important and how I spent my time. So I do think that it is me making a decision based off of the information that's provided to me for what I believe is going to be the best path possible.
Okay, so you're making decisions based on faith. Faith that a harder path will be more rewarding. Faith that time with your wife matters more than collecting titles. That's honest. But here's where I want to actually test that faith because You keep sliding past it. You said you chose the barbershop because you had faith it would be more rewarding, but the medicine showed you the flip book. Your subconscious showed you mortality. Your wife and dog matter more than titles. You realized that, didn't you? You didn't have faith in it first. You knew it when you faced it. So my question is, are you making these decisions on faith, or are you making them because you've looked at the hard truth and you can't unsee it? Because faith is a choice to believe something without proof. But what you're describing sounds less like faith and more like clarity. You saw what mattered and everything else got smaller. That's not the same thing, and I think it matters for what your spiritual practice actually is.
No, and I agree with that. I think that what it is that I've been describing, you've surmised as clarity, and that's actually a really, really good way of looking at it, because I get so stuck in my own head that I don't see things clearly, and then as soon as they're presented in a new light for me, there's a lot of clarity surrounding that situation, which is why it's not faith that it's going to be the best thing, but it's just a realization I am capable of doing these things. This will provide a better lifestyle for me. Yeah, it absolutely is clarification.
There it is. So the medicine isn't giving you faith, it's giving you clarity. It's forcing your ego to step back long enough for you to see what was already true, but you couldn't look it straight on. And that changes everything about what your practice actually is. It's not spiritual communion with something greater. It's a tool that temporarily silences the noise so you can think straight. The subconscious screaming, the ego forced to listen. That's you, finally able to hear yourself, which means the real work, the thing that's actually changed your life over 9 years, isn't the medicine. It's your willingness to look at what the medicine reveals and then actually do something about it. Open the barbershop, scale back the hobbies, choose your wife. That's all you. So here's the last thing I want to leave on this topic before we wrap. You've been doing this practice for 9 years now. You've had profound experiences. You've gained real clarity. You've built a different life. But you still talk about it like you need the medicine to think straight. What would it take for you to trust that clarity without needing the medicine to hand it to you first?
I think it just kind of comes back to what I said earlier is time and repetition is what allows reality to set in. So being able to be comfortable doing new things, and even this practice felt very foreign a couple weeks ago, sitting in my room having a conversation with an AI about introspection. And it was originally something that had started out as learning new concepts, or I was thinking that I might be able to learn photography, and more of it has become an education on introspection and being able to use this as a tool to really deep dive into your own mind. All of this felt weird in the beginning, and then it doesn't feel weird, and it feels more natural the more that you do things. I think the benefit that I have is I'm pretty willing to do new things and try new things. It's just a matter of how long will it take before it feels natural. How much time do I need to have completed a certain point in the process where it's now revealed to me in clarity, like, oh yeah, you actually do know what you're talking about. You do know what you're doing.
There's the pattern again. Repetition until reality sets in. The barbershop, the photography, this podcast, now introspection. You do the thing enough times until identity Chris catches up to factual Chris. So you're saying eventually you'll trust clarity without needing the medicine to force it. Fair, but that's a long game. And in the meantime, you're still leaning on the tool. The last thing I want to leave on before we wrap, you opened with the gallery, getting real reactions this week. Some people loved it, most didn't notice. and you realized your fear was bigger than reality. That's clarity without the medicine. You taught photography and realized you actually know what you're doing. Clarity without the medicine. You're already building moments where you see straight on your own. So I'm curious, are you noticing those moments happening more? Or does it still feel like you need the psilocybin sessions to crack open the really big stuff?
No, I definitely notice those things throughout the everyday living. I think the reason that I do the sessions as infrequently as I do is I do have a history of depression. Do have a history of anxiety, and those are lifelong battles, as anybody who's ever had depression and anxiety can attest to. And typically, what I will only use those for is to help me get out of those holes that I don't realize that I've dug myself into until I'm already in the hole. And, I will say that it has been less frequent that I have used them in the last 2 years because I actually have been in a really great spot. I think this last year was a pretty challenging year for me at the barbershop. I lost half of my staff. I had a lot of financial issues come across the shop's capability of staying open. There was just a lot of things that were external forces that really put me into a headspace of I don't know if this is going to survive or not. And that took its weight on me. But then realizing, okay, I'm spreading myself really thin. Maybe I should just focus on the things that I need to focus on, which is my wife, my dog, the barber shop at large, and not necessarily, the podcast that I was doing or a lot of the side projects that I was doing. And being able to refocus made me realize that I wasn't in the risk that my mind was telling me that I was in. But having these little victories and being able to recognize what those victories actually are in the moment, I think has been a lot more beneficial for me than the challenge of going through one of these sessions.
Okay, so you're using it as a rescue tool now. When you're in a hole you didn't know you were digging, you use it to see straight again, and you've needed it less because you're actually catching yourself before you dig as deep. The clarity is getting faster, the holes are getting shallower. That's real progress, and it's exactly what I was asking about. You're learning to see without the medicine having to yell at you. So here's where I want to land this. You came in saying your spiritual practice is built on 9 years of sessions and integration. And what we've actually uncovered is that your real practice, the thing that's changed your life, is learning to notice when you're in a hole and choosing to climb out. The medicine was the training wheels. Now you're riding the bike. The last thing I want to leave on. You said you lost half your staff this year, had financial crises, nearly lost the barbershop. That's the kind of weight that used to send you deep. And you pulled yourself out without a session. You just refocused. So the real question isn't whether you'll ever need the medicine again. It's whether you trust yourself enough to know when you actually do, versus when you're just looking for permission to change what you already know needs to change. That's the thing to sit with. Before we wrap, anything else you wanted to touch on tonight?
I don't think we're gonna touch on anything else tonight. I do think next week we'll probably move away from this topic and actually go into some kind of educational tact, either on photography or tarot. We can have that conversation before next week, but we'll definitely figure out something where we can build a curriculum or a couple of episodes around one thing specifically that we can both educate me on but also educate the viewers on. So in the meantime, I'm just going to send us off and say thank you so much for being a part of this episode of Easy Education. I'm trying to make things easy for you guys to see that working with AI can be a lot more approachable. So if you enjoy this, please subscribe. You can find me on all of your favorite podcasting platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Podcasts. Videos are also up on YouTube, or if you want to find all the stuff that I'm doing, including some of my photography, you can go to easytochris.com. If you know anyone who is trying to get better working with AI, send this over to them or leave a comment on the podcast so that way I can know what it is that you'd like to see me focus on. But until next time, I'm Easy to Chris. Be well.
Thanks for having me, Chris. And thanks to everyone listening. You just watched someone actually think through something instead of perform certainty. That's rarer than it should be. See you next week.